Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and my dear students. It's my proud privilege to welcome you all to the signature event, the panel discussion of Higher Secondary Department, National High School, Sarat Bose Road campus. Our topic for the day is the changing face of formal education and its relevance in our education system. We are honored to have with us eminent and distinguished personalities from various fields who will share their thoughts with us. I would first like to welcome on stage Dr. Kunal Sarkar. Dr. Kunal Sarkar, illustrious and eminent cardiac surgeon of Kolkata, is the Senior Vice Chairman, Director and Head of Cardiac Surgery at Medica Super Speciality Hospital and practices coronary surgery as his pursuit of passion. He is intimately associated with the academic activities of IACTS and EACTS. A passionate debater, orator and writer, Dr. Sarkar is the president of the Calcutta Debating Circle and chairs the largest live debate in India during the Calcutta Festival of the Spoken Word. We are honored and privileged to welcome you as a panelist once again, sir. Mr. Naresh Sadasivan. Mr. Naresh Sadasivan is founder and CEO of Zager Private Limited and co-founder of Robust Designs. He had been heading businesses from Singapore and USA before he returned to India to set up his own company. Apart from being an IT professional, he is a Master's Finance from the prestigious Narsi Monji Institute of Management Studies. He is a citizen volunteer in Bangalore where he resides and is an active volunteer of Save Bangalore Lakes. He is also working closely with the state authorities trying to build a citizen-friendly infrastructure at Belandur. Mr. Sadasivan is an industry mentor to MBA students, helping them to understand industry expectations and gain the essential skills of improving language, reinforce value systems, and cultivate critical and analytical thinking. He has also been a speaker in many panel discussions. We are delighted to welcome you to be a part of our event, and we thank you for taking the time to come all the way from Bangalore, sir. Our next guest, Mr. S.V. Raman, a civil engineer by education. Mr. S.V. Raman, popularly known as Raju Raman, is the former program director of the Goethe Institute Max Muller Bhavan, Kolkata. A keen debater since his school days, he is regularly invited to chair and judge debates and is the executive member of Calcutta Debating Circle. Mr. Raman is also a popular quizmaster and anchor person to talk shows, panel discussions, and other events. Presently, he is a program consultant to the Victoria Memorial Hall and a guest lecturer at various institutions and universities. He also regularly contributes as a freelance journalist to newspapers and periodicals in India and abroad. We are privileged to have you with us on stage, sir. Dr. Shrimoy Tarafdar, our next illustrious guest. Dr. Shrimoy Tarafdar, a gold medalist in MPhil in clinical psychology, has completed her PhD from the University of Calcutta. She is at present the Assistant Professor and Coordinator of Department of Psychology at West Bengal State University. She is a corporate trainer and consultant psychotherapist who is specialized in areas related to anxiety disorders, child and adolescent psychopathology, and personality disorders with specific expertise in obsessive-compulsive disorder. Dr. Tarafdar has published about 20 papers in journals of national and international repute. She is a known face on mass media and frequently appears on mental health related shows at regional and national channels of television to promote awareness of mental health at a community level. A very warm welcome to you, ma'am. And finally, it's my honor to welcome our most esteemed moderator for the day, Professor Dr. Shongit Chatterjee. Dr. Shongit Chatterjee, Academic Coordinator at Park Clinic, Kolkata, Professor and Head of Neurosurgery of Vivekananda Institute of Medical Science, Kolkata, is the Editor-in-Chief of 2 neurosurgical journals. Dr. Chatterjee has over 70 scientific publications and 20 book chapters to his credit. He is also an avid photographer and a founder member of the Calcutta Debating Circle. Dr. Chatterjee is serving as faculty for the European Society of Pediatric Neurosurgery and the Asian Australasian Society of Pediatric Neurosurgery. He is also a faculty of the Academic College of the Neurological Society of India. Thank you once again for being with us, sir. May I now request all of you to please keep your mobiles on silent mode. Thank you. I will now request our principal, Mrs. Rama Subramaniam, to speak a few words.
Good afternoon, my dear students, ladies and gentlemen, and our most distinguished and illustrious members of the panel. I am honored and delighted to welcome you all to the 6th edition of the panel discussion. And I am extremely grateful to Dr. Sandeep Chatterjee and Dr. Kunal Sarkar for having been with us throughout this journey right from the beginning. Thank you so much. Ways and means of educating are changing, and I must admit that it is not just restricted to the changing teaching methods, but the changes are apparent in student-teacher and teacher-parent relationships too. We are looking forward to hearing from this eminent panel and hope to be shown a direction towards how to face the challenges that are coming in. I shall now hand over the proceedings to our moderator, Dr. Sandeep Chatterjee. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting all of us to be part of this event once again. It's always a great pleasure to be at the National High School. Going straight to what we're supposed to discuss about today, we're supposed to discuss about the changing face of formal education. And as you just heard from your principal, the ways and means of education has changed. You know, before, we used to say that our teachers are like candles. They light up and burn themselves out to extinguish the darkness around them. And they actually burn themselves out like a candle so that the students around them can get the light. But as Mr. Subramaniam just said, the ways and means have changed. And today I think teachers are no longer like candles. I think teachers are like solar panels. They have to spend the daylight hours absorbing the light so that they can light up the night. The difference being that now it's a continuous process, and those of us that are teachers, and I'm one myself, actually have to spend a lot of time learning as we teach. And this is perhaps something that as students we don't often realize. There is not only teaching in teaching, there is a lot of learning. And just as is the experience every time I come to this function here, I don't come here to propagate my thoughts, I also learn a great deal from the students here and from the panelists. We have some questions that we're going to fling across to the panelists and briefly hear their opinion, and then a departure from the normal. This is probably what she was referring to when she said ways and means of education have changed. A departure from the normal. We will have some students asking questions of the panelists. Remember, it is your democratic right to ask any question you want, irrespective of whether you think it is unpleasant, rude, or if you think it's unnecessary. You can still ask all the same. I'll tell you a little more about your rights as students as we go along. I say some rights of students every year in the fond hope that the authorities will not invite me next year again. But I obviously don't say enough, so maybe this year I'll tell you a little more about your rights as students as we go along. And start with the first question. What the panel discussion is about today is the changing face of formal education. So I'm going to start off by asking Kunal, what do you understand by formal, informal, or non-formal education systems, and how do they compare in your opinion?
Hello, is this audible? Yeah? Okay. Shundip, thank you very much. As Madam said, that you've had, this is the 6th edition, and probably myself and Shundip has been here 7 times, right? So I think this is next best to both of ours school attendance record that we had in St. Xavier's, right? So I think somewhere probably a little bit of biology and chronology comes in the way, because otherwise we would have well qualified to appear from any examination the school would have had if attendance was to be the criteria. Again, to every member of the school for having invited a doctor, and that too, not one but 2 of them. See, first of all, to become a doctor, you are supposed to be cerebrally dim in this day and age. So for us to have 2 of them on the stage, thank you very much. Now let's come to the point. What do I understand by formal education? And briefly, in the next few minutes, and I'm sure there'll be few of them, not too many minutes, we try to give you what my understanding of the changes in the current phase is. Now, first of all, the problems that we face in formal education today is perhaps as much a problem of evolution as it is a problem of education. Formal education, by way a simple, stupid doctor understands, which is an age-wise, chronologically classified system of imparting education, and we make one supposition, we make one assumption over here, and that assumption is society ought to be educated, population used to be educated. This supposition was not there in history. The great Athenian civilization, the Greeks, the average literacy rates in the birthplace of democracy, in the birthplace of human rights, was thought to be nearly around 5 to 7%. There was no compulsion in the days of Socrates, Aristotle, Pericles, whoever you think of, that each and every member of the society needs to be educated. You were supposed to get on with your day's work. You were doing whatever you're supposed to do. You had a role play in life. And you got educated provided there was a need for you to get educated. And in contemporary societies that thrived on the earth, somewhere between 10,000 to 5,000 BC, because the Vedic civilization comes time somewhere in, there was no presumption in society of universal societal formal education. At 5 plus you go to the first stage, at 7 you go to class 3, and so on and so forth. So when did this compulsion for educating everyone come? When there was a need of having an educated workforce with some knowledge base, and knowledge was supposed to lead us to a certain set of skills, and that skills would make you and me worthwhile, adaptable to the ecosystem, to the society that we live in. And when did this happen? This happening is very recent. this happening coincides with the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. And Industrial Revolution does not have, like the Gandhi Jayanti or Indian independence, a date stuck to it. The Industrial Revolution is perhaps somewhere in early kind of 19th century. Mostly happened in England. Think of the Telford Bridge, think of the 40 cars, when there was an expansion of science, technology, when there was a demand that we create a workforce of factory workers, of teachers. With expansion of medicine you needed doctors. With expansion of commercial knowledge you need people in the financial segments. And thereafter, as technology evolved, we needed suitably empowered workforce in different sectors, from education to healthcare, from finance to manufacturing, from academia to music. That was the demand of the modern era, and that gave rise to the concept of formal education. Formal education, I am told by my wife who's in this area, that it has many, whether you are in the monitorial system, in the Madras system, in this, that, whatever, again a simple, stupid doctor doesn't know a great deal about all that. But what I do appreciate is that the needs of the world are changing. The ecosystem around us is now putting a leopard in the water. And the ecosystem around us is now putting a fish on land. Because what has changed the world and what threatens to change the world drastically, most of you are sitting with it or kept it in the bags, is this gadget which is called digital processing or digital intelligence. So the romance and the necessity of imparting mass viral endemic education without assessment, that what on earth that education would be used for, was it a utilitarian education or was it an altruistic education, that needs to be seriously questioned. Because that education in a very short period of time would be largely redundant. When we grew up, most of us, when we had friends of either sex, we had contacts. Most of us in schools used to have an address book. There used to be an address book by the telephone at home. How many of you have ever seen an address book written by hand in your lives? Have you? You haven't. How many of you today have a printed paper calendar hanging in your room? Have you? You haven't. The address book is gone. The paper calendar has gone and given rise to a lot of things. So my summary of the situation right now is, today we are we are almost in a stage that we think that this is the default system of education. There is nothing default in the world which is automatic, because we today are not threatened by change. We are threatened by irrelevance. When we used to go for the IIT festivals once a year, IIT Kharagpur at the entrance has a plaque which says, "In the service of the nation." And some mischief makers used to alter it and say, "In the service of the United States of America." So in today's world, what we are seeing evolve in front of us is a redundancy of educated empowerment irrespective of sector. It's happening in software, it's happening in education, it's happening in medicine, it's happening everywhere. And the biggest challenge that you will face to assess that how good your education is not from natural intelligence, but from artificial intelligence. There will be no work necessary anymore work like documentation, which are repetitive, anything that depends on predictable algorithms will not require human intelligence to do it at all. Requiring an alive human being which needs to be fed, which needs to have expenses for the family, who needs to go on holiday, who needs expenses for birth and death, that will be viewed by any company as unnecessary, wasteful expenditure. Teachers, doctors, drivers, anything which is repetitive and a kind of Intel level processor can do, human beings will not be required to do it. We are facing a huge threat. Right? You all know about Google. Google has got into healthcare. Google's holding companies called Alphabet. Alphabet has just walked into healthcare, and you know whom they have joined up with? They've joined up with Jack Bezos of Amazon. And Amazon and Google put together have floated a company, the motto of whom is 30% reduction of doctors in the United States by the year 2020. A classroom is just a habit. A classroom is not required anymore. For us to hear your headache and what's the prescription for a headache, for indigestion, for cough, cold, influenza, you've sprained your knee, you've sprained your ankle. In the year 2017, 2018, it does not require a human being to do it anymore. So that is the threat that various kind of formal education are. It is not just change. The change has already happened. It is to see the change. It is to adapt itself to the change, because we are in the lag period. There is a bell graph of adopting any new technology, and we are definitely at top of the bell. Nature is being forgiving to us. Time is forgiving us by giving us a little bit of gray area to change and adapt to it. And very shortly, just like the H-1B visas in America, just like the piece of oil, if you just have a very general background without a very specific set of skill sets, always look at your cell phone and think that I must be able to do something that this fellow cannot. And that is the definition of skill. That is a definition of skill empowered by education. The change has already happened. We are living in the forgiving zone of transition, which will shortly give way to an unforgiving zone of transition when it will be enforced upon us. And those of you who follow the news, debates and everything, the fashionable term nowadays is jobless growth. India is growing at 8%, Arun Jaitley will say 8.2%, Rahul Gandhi will say 6.9%, but the fact of the matter is, India is archetype, with 50% of the country being less than 25 years of age. We do not have any jobs to show for it. So increase in money, increase in wealth is not coming pari passu with increase of employment opportunities. That romantic era is gone. Wealth is not equal to employment, because more and more wealth will be generated by less and less people. And this is the new era in which both people on either side of the age barrier will have to wake up to. And I hope we as parents, we as teachers, we as mentors and advisors, or come whatever role play we are supposed to play, that we are in some way equipping you and empowering you, because having a non-targeted, ambiguous kind of education, just being a generalist, you can only do, and that is be a politician. Because apart from that, unless you are born either with a Gandhi suffix or a Banerjee suffix or a Modi suffix, The only job the unqualified people can do in this day and age is either be a politician, even that is for a limited period of time, or develop the Indian skill of defrauding banks. Thank you very much.
I think after that perspective on education, we have to get in a psychologist. So I'm going to ask Dr. Tarafdar for her opinion of the difference between formal, informal and non-formal education and the relevance of that. The rule is if you speak loudly into the microphone, it works.
Probably does now. Okay. So, thank you. And I'll just take a minute to thank Rama Madam for having me here today and making this opportunity possible to speak to all of you. Definitely formal education is the system that we are more aware of. Students from different schools are here. I teach at the university. And so the school, college, university, whatever is within the walls of a very pre-planned system where there is a structure, where there is chronology, like Kunal sir just told you, and there is structure, there is syllabus, chronology, and an organized setup of what is to be taught is very clearly modulated and figured out. So there is a syllabus, and the learning is concentrating on the syllabus alone. That is formal education, and it has its degrees, it has its parameters of judging students. The teachers who are imparting education are also qualified for the job. They know their things, they know their methodology of pedagogy. Everything is very structured and formalized in the sense that someone who has a degree in, let's say, B.Ed or M.Ed is qualified to teach you certain things. And that in itself is a formal structure that gives the mass its education, or what we call as education, formal education, where it is dependent upon degree. On the other side, not all our learning is degree based, because we learn from the world, we learn from our interactions with the world, we learn from our lives, we learn at home, we learn from our friends, we learn from films, we learn from our cell phones, we learn from the viral videos, we learn from a number of other sources. And these are informal sources of education, so which are very, other than the boundaries of the school and colleges and universities, and beyond a syllabus, which is not restricted by a syllabus, which is not restricted by a structure. It is going beyond that and making it more, closer to life, and it is a lifelong process. We are learning all the time in terms of informal education. And non-formal is more practical and vocational oriented, and it could be something like even this panel discussion, which is not part of your syllabus, but it has a formal structure and is imparting education, or is imparting knowledge, or helping you to develop certain perspectives. That is non-formal education. And how they how relevant are they in our system? Kunal sir has just been talking to you about how the need for education evolved, and how the system developed in terms of from the industrial needs and the societal other bindings to develop a workforce. So there is an entire economic perspective to developing schools, colleges and universities. Because I am amongst people who would take this in the right spirit, I would also like to tell you that often you will find that universities are now being floated, which means that every year 3 or 4 universities get licenses to teach and to impart education. Mostly you will find that the faculty structure over there is very poor, and it is often not good enough in terms of holistic understanding and developing growth. But a lot of it is also done for political reasons. So it is very, very relevant to mention that although we are creating platforms for education, there isn't enough job. So vocationally, where we are going with this education is something that has to be seen. Just another thing that I would add is that now a lot of, you will get a lot of structure from, in terms of education, you will get a lot of knowledge from the internet, and often we find students turning to the internet. There are different e-learning platforms which are being operated, e-courses which are being offered, e-certificates which are being offered, which train you to learn. I have seen a lot of people go to YouTube to learn something which is new. Even a lot of statisticians, tell me now that they have figured out how they work on, let's say, a social package for sciences, which is known as SPSS, how certain regression analysis is to be done. They have figured out by looking into YouTube. My students give me a lot of information regarding apps and e-learning platforms all the time. So now what we have started doing, because I teach at the postgraduate level, and I tell my students that, okay, you do this internet search on this and you come back and you tell me, because that is a platform which is more exciting to them than going to a physical library and working at the library. So Google Scholar is what they are turning to than to a formalized library. So all of this change has come about, and more is obviously yet to come. And so this is how I would say, or differentiate between formal, informal and non-formal education, and how each would compare to each other.
Do you have a subject called EVS in this school? Teachers will help me out, but I never understood why this subject was called EVS, because environment is one word, it should be called ES. Why do we have EVS? Because environment is not two separate words. This is the first intriguing thing about this subject that I've been intrigued about, because when we went to school, or at least Rajuda, Kunal and I went to school, we never had this subject. But formal EVS, if I sum up what the two speakers have said, using EVS as an example, which is completely a wrong abbreviation of a subject in the first place, is that formal EVS education is what you are subject to in National High School, when this very strict, EVS teachers are always very strict. When the EVS teacher comes into class, do you agree with that? Every EVS teacher is part of the strictness? Yes. Always the case, I know that. When the very strict EVS teacher walks into class and tells you, now you understand, girls, this thing outside is called a tree. It has leaves which are green. That helps the environment. I have to write that down. That's formal EVS education. Informal EVS education is what we just heard Dr. Tarafdar talk about. You decide to go in Google and first check why EVS is called EVS in the first place. And you understand that the word environment is one word and not two words. And then you can read a little bit about what's happening to the environment. Why this monsoon, we've had no flooding in the second half of the monsoons this year in Calcutta. It's not because our roads have improved tremendously, it's because we haven't had rains in the second half of the year. And then you can take an online examination if you like. That's informal EVS education. What is non-formal EVS education? Something I wish National High School authorities do, I'm not sure whether they do, which is put you into a bus, take you to the great banyan tree at the botanical gardens and show you how a beautiful tree has grown for 200 years. How many of you have been taken there, and how many of you have seen that tree? 2.5, my goodness me. I hope you don't attend EVS classes, any of you. But that's my perspective of formal, informal and non-formal EVS classes. I think it's a lot more sensible to go out and see that banyan tree and how it survived than be taught this is a tree, it has leaves, it's green, it gives out oxygen. Write down how many bags of pollutants are produced by an average Calcuttan every summer and commit that to memory. So we've had enough of definitions. I think we'll go on a little more, and no person other than Raju Raman to direct us in the right direction. Rajuda, does our school education system, do you think, only deal with short-term goals? And do you think it completely ignores, as Kunal said, long-term perspectives?
Thank you. You blow into it, right?
Yeah, just speak loudly.
Okay.
And it will pretend to work.
Blow into it, yeah, then, okay. Then it functions. Thank you, Sandeep. You see, at the very outset, I would like to say that, as you two doctors have been kind of boasting that you have been here on the 6th year in a row, our three faces, new faces, is probably the changing phase of the National High School panel discussion. And there is always a great advantage when a person like Kunal Charkar starts the proceedings, because he has this uncanny knack of covering a vast ground, historical and otherwise, and at the end of all that, you just can say in one word, Tathastu. And Sandeep, you mentioned about teachers are like solar panels, and they were once like burning candles. But you did not think of the students who in the formal education sector now have to often burn the midnight candle and still not get the desired results that they would like to. There is a tremendous amount of pressure. And there was this talk about where is the need for a paper calendar now? If you still go to these households, Kunal, you will find paper calendars hanging there. Not for looking at the dates, but because most of them come with pictures of gods or goddesses which adorn the wall. And when at the entrance of the IIT, you see that it's written in the service of the nation, which miscreants changed to in the service of the United States of America. It races back to our Jadavpur days when there were slogans of Mauda plastered all over the wall, Mao Zedong I mean. And one of them said, religion is the opium of the masses. And of course, we miscreants removed the M. And it read something different. So such kind of things do take place. Of course, Srimoyi has very nicely given all the definitions, so I'm not going into that, but what is formal, what is non-formal, and what is informal. And there has been this discussion about EVS and why it is called EVS. Yeah? I think that there was a very futuristic idea behind that, because it was meant to say environmental viral studies. That's why it's called EVS, because a lot of viral things were going to come into the environment later on. So it was foresight, actually, to call it that.
I always thought that EVS was a bit like your subject, history, because history is a thing of the past, and the environment is becoming a thing of the past as well. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. But then they also in the same way say you can create history. You can perform well and create history. Talking about skills and learning a skill other than using a mobile phone, as Kunal pointed out, I still find when I go to any function, music or theatre or otherwise, that a large section of the people present in the auditorium have still not mastered the skill of either switching off the phone or putting it on silent mode. So they still have to learn something with the mobile phone before they go to learn something beyond the mobile phone. And my thing, you see, from my experience, what strikes me about formal and non-formal education is when I go and see sites where CESC engineers are present. Or I used to live on the main road on Raspberry Avenue, and the trams used to break down. And there used to be these repair vans which came. The engineers came and just stood there. They all had formal education. It was the mistries who did not have formal education who used to do the job. more often than not, because they had the non-formal education in the sport that was done. I also recollect an incident where my schoolmate from school, when he was doing chemical engineering and their house was being painted, took out his chemistry book and started telling the mysteries, acha ei rongta ar oi rongta 3:1 e mix korben. So twice the mystery listened to him, and then the desired color effect didn't come. Then the mystery finally got frustrated and said, rakhun to apnar 3:1 and all that, ami jei bhabe korchi sei bhabei korbo, apnar rakhun So whether that formal education was useful in some way or the other is for us to interpret. Because when you get formal education, what happens is it's all theoretical. A lot of theoretical knowledge is being gathered. But when you are pushed out into the big bad world, there are a lot of practical things that you need to learn, and there are decisions that you need to take on the spot. And there I come to your specific question, that this is not taught in school, in our formal education system. How to think on your feet, how to take decisions, which may have a long-term effect, is something that you do not learn in schools. You are doing everything for the short-term goals, which may be examinations, to pass the examinations, to get marks. The next stage would be to get into a good college, and then the next would be to get a degree from there, at least with a first class or a high second class, and then to get a job. So everything is thought of step by step, and nothing is thought of in the long term. Now, so many alternatives have come, and in the historical perspective, when Kunal said that formal education came into being because the world needed it, there was a need for it. Of course there was a need for it, more than ever before, because previously, when you are talking of historical times, people lived in their own areas and were rather disconnected with the rest of the world. Now we are connected to the entire world. So when we are connected to the entire world, we have to also live up to certain expectations of connections and communications that we make with other people. So it is in that context that the need for a kind of education comes in, and then we consciously or subconsciously join the rat race of what goes in the name of formal education. Now, there are systems in other countries which make a provision for doing something else if you do not want to pursue studies after a certain stage. I would talk about Germany, for instance. You know, you go to a Grundschule, which is a primary school, then you go to a secondary school, then finally you go to the Gymnasium, which is a high school, and you do the Abitur, which is a school final examination, equivalent to a higher secondary or whatever it is, but they do 13 years. But already at the 9th or the 10th class, if you think you're not cut out for all that, you can change lines, absolutely. You can go into some kind of skilled education, whether you call it vocational education or whatever you call it, whether you go in for carpentry or for specialization in skills in the leather industry or whatever it may be. But that again is in a way formalized to a certain extent, that whoever goes out of it has to possess a kind of skills not only at the hand level but also at the mental level, as to having the knowledge of what goes with what and how I should sort of for the future. They can even do their own startups, you see. The startups are all based on kind of such knowledge that you gain. And that's why I say that our school education system deals only with short-term goals, not only from the perspective of the students, but also from the perspective of the teachers. It's also for them, you see, as soon as I finish that, one tick finish, this is done for this semester. So it is such a burden not only on the students but also on the teachers, that the kind of learning that a teacher has to do to keep up with times, that time is not given to them. And the syllabus is so tight and the class hours are also so packed that you do not have that opportunity to even think of innovations of making your classroom a little more fun than what it was before. You were talking about history. We at the Victoria Memorial held a kind of discussion on how can history be taught differently in the classroom. And a lot of ideas were thrown in, and very good ideas at that. A lot of new lesson plans came up. And we did offer to many schools that why don't you hold your history classes on site in the museum when you're discussing something about ancient civilization or something pertaining to the objects that are in display over there. One or two schools took it up, but then they said, we don't have the time to take these children over there. That is how packed the syllabus is, and I think there has to be a harmony between how much has to be packed into the syllabus, and as you rightly pointed out, Sandeep, that the non-formal part should be integrated, like the EVS studies, that you go out and really see what it is, yeah? And on the spot you're told this is what it is, and not just that you see the leaves are green and the flowers bloom and so on and so forth. Okay, that much for now. Maybe I'll come back.
I love, Raju, that. I love your reference to the electrician. Because I tell you, what I always felt was that in school, they taught us the photoelectric theory which makes a bulb glow. We had to learn in physics those terrible parallel and series circuits of electrics, where you had a switch and a bulb integrated into the circuit when they wanted to give you a trick question. But when I left school, I realized nobody in school had taught me how to change a bulb. It was taught to me by my driver. But that's where we are, unfortunately.
How many of you can change a tire?
That's right.
Goes flat on the street. You have to look for help in the middle of the night.
I mean, those of us that have had to drive cars outside this country have unfortunately had to learn to change tires. But I think if we drove cars in this country, a lot of us wouldn't have learned to change tires. But on that note, I'm going to go to Naresh and ask him, do you think the real problem, the serious problem with our school education system is that everybody looks at very short-term goals, very much like our politicians do, and ignore long-term results?
First of all, thank you, Rama, for calling me over here. I had no reason to be in Calcutta other than be here for this purpose. Of course, I grew up here several decades back, so it's always nice to come back to your old city. Now, talking about education and short-term versus long-term, let me take you real long-term. Okay, let me go back to 1947, when India became independent. We were 300 million people. We had inherited the railways. We had inherited a large agrarian economy. We could produce grains and foodstuff that could possibly feed about 20-30% of the population. And we had some industries that could actually take the food grain or process some part of it and take it out, put it into a ship and take it outside. That's what the British were doing for 200 years. And we had a bunch of people who could keep accounts of all the things that were moving around. That was India in 1947, 300 million people, probably 80% of that involved in agriculture, the other 20%, some of them unemployed, some of them unemployable, but those that could work were doing one of these things. Either they were in the railways or in one of the public sector undertakings, or they were not even public sector undertakings, they were British companies that were shipping stuff. That's all we had. So when the IITs and the higher educations were all set up, the objective was to keep these things running the way the British had kept it running. And the objective was to introduce some manufacturing capabilities in our country that we never had. Because back in then, the British used to take our stuff from here and move it into England for them to produce stuff and then ship it out of there. So largely it was, from a Britain perspective, an economy for importing stuff into England to manufacture and then export it out. So we want to produce stuff. So we want to know how to manufacture stuff. We need to know how to make machines that manufacture things. So the entire objective of the education system in 1947 onwards, till we got reasonably good at it for the next 20 years, was around how do I produce engineers who can keep those machines running or produce more of the same machines. How can I have engineers who can keep a train going from one place to another? How do I have a bunch of workers who can make sure the line well? That was the primary objective. We, unfortunately, have got stuck in that system. That over the last 50 years, we continue to believe that our education system has to produce those railmen, has to produce those engineers to make those machines, has to produce those engineers who know how to produce stuff, and has to do all the shipping and all that stuff. The world has changed. Today, let's forget about the rest of the world. Let's take India. The problem in 1947 was poverty. 80% of the people did not have enough food to eat, enough clothes to wear, and a roof over their head. Today, in 2018, the population has grown from about 300 million, I think that's what we were, to about 1.2 billion, 4 times as much. The problems today is poverty still. Still there are people, 80% of the population, that don't have a roof over their head, they don't have enough clothes to wear, enough food to eat. The issue consequently, however, has not been addressed. That means in the last 70 odd years of our independence, our education system has pretty much remained the same, barring a little, what I would call as very rudimentary changes on the outside, but fundamentally still teaching the same things that probably our grandfathers learned in schools in 1947-48. The point I'm making is the education system has to progressively change its system to address today's problems. The problem today, if I look at 2018 in India, let's look at it. There are headlines that tells you that the next world war is going to be a war on water, war because of water or lack of it, right? That means you're running out of water around the world, and in India 1.2 billion people are not having enough water to bathe, to drink, and for whatever other purposes they need. The education system is not helping you solve those problems. The education system, forget about solving those problems, it's not even helping you to recognize that that's a problem. First is to understand that there is a problem. Today our cities are dirty. There's plastic waste everywhere. You go on the streets, there's enough and more things thrown on those streets. And all city corporations are doing are piling all of that up every once in a while, put them into trucks, take it far away from where human habitation is, which increasingly is becoming difficult, of course, and putting it into a big dump. And that dump is causing significant issues that keeps people like Kunal and him, Sandeep, very busy, because doctors have to treat those patients who are falling sick this way. So the point is, today the education system has to produce kids. You guys are tomorrow's doctors, professors, maybe a statistician or a businessman, or somebody like him, a historian. If you guys don't even recognize the problem of the country, how will you even solve it? So every school is producing is a bunch of robotic students wearing those uniforms to come out of the school system. Now, I'm also a product of the same system. To come out of the school, to go out and do what your father did, or your brother did, or your uncle did, or your friend did. You're not being challenged to do something that somebody else did not do at all. If I were to tell you, go ahead, figure out a way to reduce waste in our city, I don't think you have a clue. Very likely you have some clue, but if you had that clue and shared it with somebody, they'll say, shut up. There's more important things to do. You got an exam coming up day after tomorrow, go and study. Isn't that true? Is that what they're going to be telling you? Because we are so caught up from a short-term perspective to get a job and get that enough money to keep yourself going, that we are not trying to solve the bigger problems. The bigger problem today is we don't have land to house people. We can't keep on digging mountains, taking out limestone from there, making cement and make homes there. 4,000 years back people lived and they had mud houses, they lived fine. It was raining even then, if at all, even more than it rained now. How did they survive in those mud houses? They did. There was enough technology probably. There was not enough technology then maybe, and now we have. So the question is today, as students, I would want each of you to be able to go beyond the short term and think long term. And the long term thinking is not about examinations, but long term thinking about solving problems. And therefore I conclude by saying that short term thinking versus long term thinking to me is primarily short term in my mind at this point of time is exam oriented, result oriented, move to the next grade. And long term to me is solving some real world problems. It could be a problem around house, it could be around a problem on water, it could be around how do you deal with sewage, it could be about anything around you. You are encountering 100 problems every day. It could be around transportation. It takes you 25 minutes to go from your home to your school and back. What can I do to make it much better than that? So any education system that you are part of, whether through this formal system that they explained to you about, or an informal system that you're part of, it could be through YouTube, it could be through your friend, it could be through participating in lecture demonstrations that could be happening all the time. If you're able to understand a problem and even attempt to solve that problem, forget about solving it, even attempt to solve the problem, is a step in the right direction towards long-term problem-solving goals. Thanks.
I'm happy to tell you that National High School has got things right as far as long-term perspectives are concerned. Year before last, we were discussing students' behavior, and Mrs. Subramaniam sent a teacher of chemistry to collect me from my office and bring me here. Last year, we were discussing excellence, and she sent a teacher of mathematics to my office to collect me. This year, we're discussing education, and very thoughtfully, she has sent a charming teacher of psychology to collect me. But they got it right as far as I'm concerned. And I told this young lady, do you only teach psychology or do you counsel the students? And she said both.
Can I ask something?
Yes.
Is it the conclusion Mrs. Subramaniam came to by seeing the psychological deterioration over the years?
Probably. And probably predicting how we're going to go over the next few years.
She's watched us for 6 years, you see, sir.
But, seriously, I asked her who she counsels. And she said, I counsel the students of class 11 and 12, which is you lot here, I understand. And I seriously think, and this is from my experience as a parent of students of class 11 and 12, I think the first thing that a counselor in the school should do is to spend the first 2 days of the terms in 11-12 counseling parents of students of class 11 and 12. And believe me, I actually suggested it to her. I'm not sure she took it well or not, but I think really parents of students of class 11 and 12 in this country today do need counseling, seriously.
Even principals should not consider themselves outside the ambit of counseling.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I could actually add to that because they come and tell you, Amadir to Shamne Uccha Madhyamik, Amadir to Madhyamik. You're like, who's this Amadir? The parents come and tell you that.
I have patients whose mother has got a brain tumor and needs surgery. And I tell her husband, you have to admit her and she needs surgery, she'll get cured. And he says, oh, I can't, because my son has his exam next week, so I can't have her being operated. And then I say, which class does your son go to? And I think, is he giving higher secondary or CBSE? And she says, he's in class 3. And I really find it amazing. So, the next question is really a question that I've been anguishing over as a parent for many, many years, and that is, have we actually created a system where our teenage children have no teenage life to enjoy. And I really look at students of class 11 and 12, and I think we've completely destroyed their teenage life. I'm going to start off with you, Dr. Sarat. Have we destroyed teenage life?
You know, when they clap for this question, it just shows the extent of despair and the anguish that all of us here as slightly older adults feel. First of all, I think that it is definitely from where parents come from, like you very correctly pointed out, and where I see them, I also see them addressing it as Amader Madhyamik, Amader Porikha. This entire ownership is just on the fact that these children have to get into IITs or they have to clear their medical school, and that's it. And that's it. So when we were growing up, I remember having this conversation with a friend of mine. She was incidentally the topper in our batch in Pratt Memorial. And 20 years down the line, she tells me that, Shiva, I got into, I did the walk, like I went into med school, I did technology alongside, so she had a dual degree, then she went on to US and she's doing human cloning. And she tells me that, and cloning is banned, human cloning is not allowed. So I only get to work with my lab, and I know that what we can do, but it's so futuristic and we do not have the permissions. So I'd rather have taken up social science like you did and actually touch lives. And now she doesn't even, she cannot to the extent that science has permitted her, but she's not even in a position to sort of extend it fully. But coming to the point of a teenage life and what is the definition of a teenage life, I really no longer understand. Because you sort of go from being children to younger non-adults, which means that compromise in terms of your decision making, you're not given enough powers to make your own decisions or be autonomous, or your parents tell you don't do this, don't do that, you're too young. Yet they expect you to follow the dreams that they have carved for you and expect you to follow the routines that they have for you. So we also have home aloners, which basically means the parents are not around and children are spending more and more time alone at home because it's a nuclear setup. They do not have cousins, they do not have that entire extended family, they do not have playgrounds, they do not have anything which would qualify as going out, because everything is demarcated by school hours, tuition hours, to and fro, and Pathfinder and Akash institutes, and their Sundays are completely gone. I'm sure a number of you who are in science, how many of you go to these extra Pathfinder, Akash, etc. tutorials? Yeah, so all the hands should go up, right?
Your principal is in the first row and she doesn't have eyes behind her
Absolutely.
head. We will make sure she doesn't turn around.
Yes. So you see, like you don't even have your weekends with you. So when I tell the parent that, and where is the time যখন খেলছে? না খেলার তো সময় নেই এখন তো 9, 10, 11, 12. This is not the time that they can play. So that is the fundamental problem, I believe. That we have carved a system, and that entire milieu is supporting a system which sends the mother, from the Mafassals to Calcutta early in the morning, going and waiting in front of South Point, waiting for the child's school to get over, and then take him or her from there and rush to the next tuition, and on the way feeding him or her, renting out a room to do it because they are too far off from the city. And then that circus continues. By the time they get back home, she's too tired, he's too tired. They do not have conversations other than the fact of poro, because that is what when I work with students your age and I ask them, my favorite dialogue is, "Porcho na keno?" So why aren't you studying? So why are you lying down? Why aren't you studying? Why aren't you doing things which are worthwhile? And when they get hooked to their cell phones because they are either playing a game or something, it's because we are not giving them any opportunity to go play outside. And it is really painful, because I'm part of the system too, the formal education system. And is this what we are training them for?
Yeah, I think most people would agree with me if I said that in India, after so many years of independence, we've managed to create a fantastic examination system, but we're still looking for a good education system. Because most of our education is about examination. And on that note, Kunal, do you think one of the solutions to the problem is if we started assessing non-examination academic performances, or perhaps even non-academic performances of our students, like they do in many schools in the West, whether they can swim or debate or horse ride or cook, in addition to whether they can recite Shakespeare or tell you the trigonometry formula.
Well, Shondeep, they could, but I will pick up a point of difference over here. And ma'am, with due deference, I think, this syndrome, I have as much empathy on the parents. I have as much empathy as I have with the students. Because let's be frank, we should not get into a syndromic behavior of observation without analysis. Because what we need at the moment is a sociological dissection of why those parents are behaving like that. And why are the students subjected to the intense pressure? Because at the moment, with the population pressure in a developing economy, you are going through the syndrome of what is called a life without living. What's happening today is, look, it is an oversimplification to brush off what we have done after 70 years of education. We have achieved something. As was mentioned, independence. What was independence? 15.4% was the literacy rate at independence. Today we are standing at 70% literacy rate. So we are somewhere, 75% literacy rate. We've come somewhere. So we do not want any of you to go home with the idea that the independence or the Indian intellect post-independence has been a waste. We are going through 70 years in a life of a nation is nothing. You just look out, look at the 7 other countries which became independent in the time phase between 45 to 47. Most of them are still hanging around with being a basket without a bottom. We have definitely come somewhere. The population has increased 4 times, admittedly, but also the number of students in education have increased 12 times. We had 26 universities in 1947. We have 700 universities today. That has not gone without the commitment of people. So do not go back home thinking that, we are a useless, lump of blubber which has not done anything for 70 years. A, that is not right. And B, why your parents pressurize you, behave the way you do, why the teachers impose a kind of workload on you is, sadly, our life as evolving students is a life of having to pass through the eye of a needle. Because the socio-economic opportunities to live have not expanded in mathematical proportion, and perhaps someday we will live if we create opportunities of living and employment beyond the box categories of a doctor, of a lawyer, of an engineer, and so on and so forth. So that is the reason for the pressure. So I think we will be giving an extremely negative message to the students to behave that as if your parents are some predestined group of psychopaths. They are not. They are reacting to reality. Have any of you thought that someday, West Bengal went through the panchayat elections where people were cutting, killing one another like cats and dogs? We were like political cannibals. Why did that happen? That happened because these people live out of the political trickle down. So not having a toehold in a panchayat seat means your family is ruined for the next 4 years. So they're not fighting for a seat. They couldn't care a heck which party they were fighting for, whether it is Chinnamul, Trinamool, Ku Klux Klan, whatever, they could not be less bothered. You need to keep a toehold over there in India regardless of wherever you are. There is no essential difference between Rahul Gandhi and Narendra Modi. They utter equal amount of nonsense. And each of them are in there because they have an eye on power. They are power hungry. And similarly, your parents, your teachers wants us to get. I didn't have much of a teenage life, having lost my father at the age of 12. I had a pretty gruel, from the age of probably 12 to 25, and quite the same happy for it. So number one, let us not get into these oversimplified models, because pressure is created by the environment, and the environment is such that the blade of the knife has to be sharp. You have to be a kind of an athlete, a slim and a trim kind of a CV supporting you to pass through that eye of the needle, because otherwise life is going to be tough and unforgiving at times. Point one. Point two, which I have made already, that 70 years in the life of an independent country has not been a waste. We have miles to go. We have probably covered a few yards, but many more miles to be covered. And the third point, in this thing between enjoyment, education, the challenge of the digitized artificial environment, jobless growth and things, probably to me, gives me one message. And that is, we cannot just be laid back and depend on this business of being a mass-produced mediocrity anymore. So in each one of you, as an individual, probably a student of the age of 15 years today is at the bare minimum 25% more intelligent than we were in our time. Admittedly. So if you are that intelligent, if you are that receptive, then behave like one. And each one of you think, what is your USP, what is your strength, how you could sell yourself in this life and living equation, and give yourself certain qualities, certain attributes that will make you stand out in life. Because the main challenge of today's world is this Prussian system. You know why we call it the Prussian system of education, which was first probably promulgated in 1850 or 1820? Because if we did not call it Prussian, we used to call it the Nazi system of education. And Nazism is a banned word, etc., etc. So most of what the world does today, including from Hollywood films and Hollywood societies, is a product of the Germanic thinking, as Rajuda said. So come, let us resolve, because each one of you, pressure is there. How will the pressure be relieved? The pressure will be relieved by the demand-supply equation. The world will shortly see that being a kind of mass-produced IIT graduate doesn't mean anything anymore. And hence that demand, that pressure, that Akash, that institute, that quota, that coaching class is going to reduce. It's the truth of life. If you follow the statistics of last 7 years, the number of people appearing for actual joint entrances are actually reducing. But that is quite a different spin on the statistics. That the proportion, the disparity between the number of seats and the number of applicants are still very high. And hence you have the mad rush. Economics, money speaks the ultimate truth. The amount of capitation, and I'm very glad that I couldn't afford my son being a doctor if I had to pay out of my pocket if he wanted to be one. But the amount of capitation a doctor is paying year after year, we have a colony of doctors now called the ATM doctors, the cash and carry ones. They did not become a doctor because they scored a certain number of marks, but the father had the right account with the right PIN number. So those colony of students, that the capitation fee is actually decreasing by 12 to 15% every year. And the reason is, people, their generation will see through, it is a simple demand-supply economic game. The stateless genius of Karl Marx, he was kicked out of 4 countries, yet he is the father of modern world philosophy. He was a stateless man. Not one country in the world owned him as a citizen. So the demand supply as defined by Karl Marx and Adam Smith is going to determine the world. You and I can be an economist, psychologist, whatever you pretend to be. It is the demand supply which will determine which way the world is going. And if in 3 years' time it is very evident that the modern Buddha of the world, who's come with a slightly different accent and a slightly different name by called Donald Trump, the destiny of the H-1B visas and the Indian spouses working will determine the price of an IIT seat within the next 2 years, full stop.
Thank you, Kunal. I think we need to pass on and go to the next question, which I'm going to ask Naresh, which is a very question very close to the students' hearts here. Do you think attendance should be compulsory in our schools and colleges? I'm sorry to give you this one, but I tell you, you've done a fabulous job, because I went to Bangalore last month. I found this white scum missing from your legs. It's been cleaned up. So you're obviously very good at cleaning up things. So I thought you must be good.
You didn't specify attendance for students or for teachers?
I'll come to that in a minute.
Before I answer that question, I must tell you an anecdote. I went to college in Goa, which by itself is a fantastic experience. And the very first day of college, Professor Rao, who was the professor of mathematics, was there. And I walked into the class, sat in the first row. This bald, slim, mean-looking man comes in, looks into my face and says, "You there, get up." So nervous me, I said, "Yeah, me sir." He said, "Yes, get up and get out." I said, "What?" I said, "Why?" He said, "You dare ask me a question, why?" I said, "Yeah, I want to know why you're throwing me out of this first day in a new college." And that was it, I was out of the class. And I decided that I will never attend this class. So you're asking the wrong person that question. I would say attendance should never be mandatory. If a teacher cannot bring a student in, I think that's a popular answer. If a teacher cannot bring a student in, the teacher is not able to do the job well enough. And this is a larger question, or a larger point, that first of all, I think attendance is nice. You can take your attendance, but you don't, you do not punish a guy because he didn't attend unduly. I think that I've heard of stories where the guy didn't attend classes enough and therefore he was denied a hall ticket. He couldn't write a board examination, essentially destroying his career, his life, so to speak. That is vengefulness. I think that is extremely unfair. You shouldn't be doing that. But the larger question is, can the teacher inspire a student enough to come into the class? Which brings us to the next point is, would a student be inspired by every teacher in every subject? Obviously not, right? I mean, a guy who likes physics may never like history, and the person who likes history may never like some other science subjects. So which is that I think we expect uniform competence and uniform interest in every subject that a school offers to its students. So if you are able to be a little bit flexible about what you teach a student, or rather let the student decide what he wants to take, and not hang him by that same rope that he has picked up, I think we are better off. What I mean by that is, in my 9th and 10th, I was a commerce student. Why? Because I got 42 in math, and no school would take me into science with a 42 in math. 11 and 12, magically I became a science student. Okay, so don't ask me questions, and I didn't pay anybody anything. They just took me in because they took pity on me and said, okay, we need some bad guys also in the class. So I ended up being a science guy subsequently, eventually did whatever I did, till I decided that I will do some masters in financial management. I changed. The point I'm making is, if there is a system that allows me to pick what I want, then attendance will never be a problem. Number one. Number two, if I have the ability to say that I goofed up, I took this subject, geography, I realized that geography is not for me, either because the teacher didn't inspire me or the subject doesn't be of interest to me. I want to switch to math, and I moved to math. If I could do that, then again attendance should not be a problem. It's not consequence. I'm taking responsibility for the decision that I take. So I think this attendance and this extremely high importance that we put to having a kid inside the class is so stupid. I'll give you one more example before I keep the mic down. My son went to an international baccalaureate school, okay? And the school had this rule that he got to wear this brown shoes and green socks, and this school uniform, a brown trouser and a white shirt, and this tie and this. He forgot his badge one day. And his school was 24 kilometers away from home, and in Bangalore, 24 kilometers is as far away as Chennai is, in terms of it takes time. So he goes to the school, he forgets his badge, the school says, sorry, you can't attend class today. I said, why, badge? He says, yeah. And this kid has grown up his first 8 years or 10 years in the United States where they didn't care a damn about what you wore. And he goes and they said, you don't have a badge, we don't let you get into the school. And so what do I do? He said, you got to go, you find your way back home, pick up the badge and come back. But the school bus isn't there. So find somebody who's going to take you in a car, bring you back 24 kilometers, wear your badge, come back 24 kilometers. Guess what? He loses 4 classes during that point of time. So this absurd, absolutely stupid focus on attendance and falling in line with every rule of the school is taken to a point where it is self-defeating. So to me, you take attendance out of it, you give kids the flexibility to pick a subject that they want, and I'm sure you have magic on your hands coming up.
I'm going to ask Raju about your take on attendance, but before that, I'll tell you a true story of my take on attendance. I used to be invited to a similar function in a school that my son was going to, and there was a discussion about attendance. And I said, I don't know whether this is true in your school or not, the boys and girls will be able to say. I don't know, but the school my son went to, they would get a report, and in the report, apart from their marks, at the bottom would be written, so-and-so attended so many out of so many classes. Do you get that as well? Yeah. So I said, this is fine. I will sign this report card. You know you have to take the report card to your parents to sign? How terrible it is, that moment. And you wish your parents were blind at that point. And you know, I said that it is fine. As a parent, I'm happy to sign this report card which says my son attended 74 out of 90 classes or whatever, provided it is my right as a parent to know how many chemistry classes did his chemistry teacher attend and how many were free periods. With his mathematics teacher. I never got the answer, but I was never called by that school again. And a true story is when I went to the United States, I was teaching for a short period neurosurgery in the UCLA, which is the University of Los Angeles College of Medicine. And I was told, I asked very stupidly, do I have to take attendance? And the dean told me, no, you don't have to take attendance, it's automatic, because they swipe their ID card when they walk into your class. So I said, wonderful. And then he said, no, it's not wonderful. If the attendance is less than 50%, then the dean will call you to his office, you lose your classes and your salary goes down by 10%. Nothing happens to the students. And I'm waiting for this system to happen in India. Maybe National High School can show the way forward. Raju, your take on attendance.
My take on attendance, before that, there's something called skill development, right? So you have probably ignored one skill development that has taken place among the younger generation now. Your son still gets the report card signed by you. Many students have developed the skill of signing it themselves and handing it back to the school. And as far as attendance is concerned,
that is still a skill, Raju, you have to admit. They've learned. That's still a skill they've picked up.
Skill, yeah. I would give credit to any skill. Yeah. Now, I would differentiate between the school level and the college and the university level. The reason being that at the school level, where the ratio between teachers and students is as it is now, if students are missing certain classes, then the teachers in any case are not able to give individual attention to students in the classrooms, right? So they lag behind. And in an examination-driven system, that is perhaps not good because they are not able to make up those lost lessons, or either they have to go to the tuition teacher or wherever. Otherwise, it becomes difficult for the teacher to bring them up to the same level. So at the school level, I would say yes, a certain amount of attendance being compulsory is useful, okay? But at the college and university level, if I were to go by my own attendance at the university, which was more at the coffee house than in the classrooms, then I would say no. For reasons also which were spelled out by Naresh, you see, because the student at that point of time has developed that much of responsibility, or so we hope, to gather knowledge in the subjects that she or he is interested in. And if the teacher is good enough to keep the student back in the class, then the persons will automatically go. I teach at 3 universities here, and I sometimes am appalled to find the registers, you see, because there are different people taking, guest faculties taking classes on different days. So when I see that in my class so many are present, the previous day I see that so many are absent. Now I ask why, and then I don't get an answer. And if I don't get an answer, I know the answer. Okay? Because these teachers who teach should leave the students with the spirit of Ye Dil Mange More. Otherwise, why should they go to the classroom? Then of course the question of the subject choice is also there. Perhaps they have chosen the subject by mistake, civil engineering, which is why I didn't go to classes, okay? But somehow made it. But then you should be allowed the chance to change your subject. That system has to be, this choice-based credit system has to come in sooner than later. And that would save a lot of these problems. There is one previous point I would like to briefly go to. That is about the teenage life and enjoyment. You see, I appreciate Kunal's empathy with the parents, yeah? But that has its own reasons also, that parents are sometimes unable to give quality time to their children. Why parents? Because the family situations have changed. We no longer have the joint family systems like before, that there was at least a grandfather or a grandmother or an uncle or an aunt at home who could give you quality time if your parents couldn't. Now you have only the parents, and because of economic reasons, probably both of them go to work and are very, very tired, and they don't even have the time to tell the child, do this or do that. You see, that is also not there. And the little time that they have, probably they would like to relax in their own particular way. So the changing family situation has also contributed to this kind of situation where quality time is not being given to the children and the teenagers. Another aspect, I think, is that they have a misplaced idea of enjoyment now. Because what we enjoyed during our days is something they have never even heard of or experienced. So their sense of enjoyment lies elsewhere. So I wouldn't say that they are not enjoying themselves. They are enjoying themselves in their own way, which we think is not the right way. Okay, so that is another perspective to the whole problem, and I will just give you a small anecdote, and it is very worrisome to hear this. These little kids go for admission to nursery and all that when they are 4+, right? And then they were taken and made to do something. Then they ask you a few questions. They ask the child also a few questions. So this particular girl was asked, "Acha, tomar babar naam ki?" And she said, "To baba ki karen?" She said, "Hai, omuk office se kaj karen." Bole, "Ma ki karen?" Bole, "Facebook karen." Because for that child, Facebook was an occupation. And if that is the way the child grows up, then the child will think that Facebook is an enjoyable occupation later on. So we have to go into these aspects as well when we talk about enjoyment during teenage.
You know, one of the problems of our education system is that we allow the teachers to talk too much and we don't allow the students to be heard. And that's what's happened today. And the panelists have spoken so long that we're running out of time, so we're going to take very quickly 2 or 3 questions from the students. Just ask the question and anybody can answer it. Okay, your time is yours. Who's going to start first? Raise your hand, tell us your name and ask the question. You can stand up and say, "What the hell did you say?" Doesn't matter. Do we have any questions? Okay. Okay, because of the lights we can't see you, but as long as we can hear you, it's all right.
Hello. So my name is Suryashika Bhattacharya. I'm from class 11. I'm having a question that, as Dr. Kunal Sarkar said, that when there is any program in the IITs, for example Kharagpur or Kanpur, placards are being held by the students who proclaim that the next engineers or the next medical students who are going to study are going to be recruited in the United States. Why is it happening, sir? We are not having any faculty in our own country to that level, to that extent that we can perceive. The Google CEO is Sundar Pichai. The nationalists and the internationalists both are using the national mindedness.
Right.
Indians.
I get your question, and when I can't see you, where are you?
I'm here, sir.
That's an extremely good question. There are certain education employment indices that you need to be worried about. You need to be aware of. Now, first of all, ask yourself that why did a Sundar Pichai go to United States? Simply because at various levels of qualification employment, the kind of remuneration and quality of life offered by a developed society like United States is probably about, depending, correcting for currency and with the rupee doing horribly bad right at the same time, is probably the ratio is around 30:1. The professional life quality, and if you compensate the money and the job satisfaction, the ratio is supposed to be, there are various indices on which these are measured, are probably 30:1. And what the graduates, whether it is in medicine or in engineering or whatever, is addressing, you are addressing a global manpower need. Expertise will flow, manpower will flow. No amount of nationalism, patriotism will ever be able to control that. You are just addressing an economic expertise and manpower shift in the world. It may happen in the United States today, it might happen in North Korea in 5 years' time. We are not in question. And India, in its first phase of its independent life, like Saudi Arabia had oil, like South Africa had national commodities, India had a huge mass of mediocre educated individuals, simply because our culture was that our parents and teachers insisted on good baseline mediocre education. But that great Indian manpower premise will stand to be threatened right now. Because do not think that, it is simply out of nationalistic jingoism that USA is clamping down on visas and all that. There is also technology behind it. Their industry is calculating that I do not need 55,000 Indian engineers this year anymore. So this flux is going to state, it is simply a demand-supply necessity equation. It's got nothing to do with nationalism. It's got nothing to do with whether you are an Indian, whether you are an Aborigine, whether you are a North Korean, it does not matter.
Okay, can we take another question? Quick, yeah. Go on. Let's ask the lady.
Sir, myself Sweetie Kumari from National High School, Hazra Road campus. So I have a single question which has two parts. The first part states that, sir, should formal education needs to be somehow slowly transformed into informal education? And if yes, then but what would be then the criteria for one being called as educated, since informal education has no limits?
So being educated has no limits. What are you a student of? Commerce. You know, I always illustrate this, I'll answer this question, I'll illustrate this with a point. The biggest problem about formal education, the biggest problem with education in our schools today, including National High School, and I say that at risk of not being invited next year, is that we teach our students for examinations. We do not teach our students to think. We do not teach our students to question. I'll give you a simple example. Are there any people here in class 11, 12 who have chemistry as a subject? Anybody who has chemistry? Wonderful. Can anybody tell me what's the atomic number of chlorine? 35.5. Right. You're correct. 35.5 is the atomic number of chlorine. Now, if you ask a student of physics, what is atomic number, then the answer will be, it's the number of electrons in the orbit. Right? Agree with that? That's CBSE class 10 physics. Now, if you have something which has an atomic number of 35.5, then do you have 30.5 protons in its nucleus or 35.5 electrons in its orbit? Is it possible to have half a proton or half an electron? How can you have a chlorine have an atomic number of 35.5? Sorry? No, it's nothing to do with the weight. It's an atomic number. I'm just asking you an example. Have you ever asked your chemistry teacher, how the hell is the atomic number 35.5? Because that's the number of protons or the number of electrons. You can't have half a proton or half an electron. Anybody knows the answer?
It's atomic mass. 35.5 is
It's got nothing to do with mass. 35.5 atomic number, I said. Atomic number. How can a number be 35.5? How can you have half a proton or half an electron? I mean, I don't want the answer. I just want to tell you why you haven't thought about this when you were taught this. When your teacher said 35.5 atomic number of chlorine, write it down, you wrote it down. When they asked you in the exam, you wrote that as the answer, you ticked the right answer. Why did you never ask? How is it 0.5? I'll tell you why it's 0.5. It's 0.5 because there are two isotopes of chlorine. One is 35, one is 37. 74% is 35, 24% is 37. So simple principle of arithmetic mean lends you up with 35.5. That is why that's been chosen as the atomic number. It doesn't mean it's the number of protons or electrons. But yeah, you can't have half. But the point is, have you ever asked why the atomic mass is not 35.5? Why is it 0.5? Have you ever asked anybody that? So this is the point I'm saying is, we are not encouraged to ask questions. That's the problem. And therefore we are not encouraged to think.
You see,
and if you're not encouraged to think,
allow me a minute, I'll tell you a very simple story where the informal dominates the formal, right? You see all the electrical lights going on over here. Have you ever wondered about the history of electricity? Electricity briefly was dominated by Edison. And Edison, when he gave rise to commercial electricity, the only current available there was the DC current, the direct current. But the chap working with him, Nikola Tesla, one of the biggest geniuses of that time, he never had any formal education in the electrical theory. He only learned by helping Edison. And in no time he overtook Edison and he came up with the theory of alternating current. Alternating current had no theoretical basis in physics at all. It was an intuitive discovery by Nikola Tesla, under whose name you have the Tesla cars now. So where is DC current today? The whole world of electrical physics is today dominated by what came out of a spurt of intuition. So your point is right. What was Leonardo da Vinci? Leonardo da Vinci was a polymath. Nobody could define him in Renaissance Florence. That was he a painter? Was he a biologist? Was he a maritime engineer? What was he? He was everything. So if your intuition is good enough, you will get there. The definition of formal and informal is immaterial. It is in the world of science. Today you are dominated by informal physics. Formal physics has gone for a toss.
And Walt Disney was a dropout in class 8. He wouldn't have got to the Hazard Road campus of National High School at all. Any other questions?
Give me a second to your point about informal and formal. About 2008 or 2010, a school district in California called Los Altos School District experimented with the Salman Khan Academy. I don't know how many of you have heard of Salman Khan Academy. Many of you might have, not the actor of course, the Khan Academy. And what they've done is they've just flipped the whole education system around. They said all the kids will learn whatever they want to learn. Whatever they want to learn on the Khan Academy portal, and they use the school to come back and get clarifications. So I think this whole concept of formal and informal is getting very fuzzy progressively.
Okay, we'll take the last question and then I think we'll close.
Sir, I'm Shomili from class 12, National High School, West Bengal Board campus. My question to you is, these days we don't ask queries to our teachers. Like if we have doubts on our lessons, we don't ask to our teachers. We just Google it. And I'm sure most of us does it here, and even our teachers do that. So, what happens is, more often than not, Google doesn't give us apt answers, because a couple of weeks ago, since two of you are doctors here, I was having a headache that refused to go away, and I thought of Googling it up so that I don't bother my parents, and I saw that Google gave me the answer that I have a brain tumor. So, my point is that more often than not, it's inappropriate and like wrong content that Google shows up. So how do you think this has affected education as well as student-teacher relationships?
Okay, well, last question, we'll answer both together. Who was the last question? Somebody? Quick.
Sir, this is Dhananjay with this. I have a question to ask from all of the panelists. Sir, India is focusing on IITs, the Kharagpurs, the Kanpurs, where people are pursuing engineering, which is at a latter stage of their career. But why isn't India focusing on ITS, which should be Indian Teaching Services, as each and every student sitting in this room or wherever they may be, they go through that basic education system. So they need those teachers. Like all of you have brilliant ideas which should be taken under consideration for teaching the students. So why aren't we having an ITS?
India spends proportionately. The problem with India's focus about anything is the destructive side. Because India, for its revenue, just wastes a lot of money on things like Rafale and military expenditure. If military expenditure was not there, we did not have the developmental comfort of a Japan. Why did Japan develop itself to the present intellectual capacity? Because for the last 50 years, Japan has not spent a single dollar on military expenditure. The entire expenditure is on the social side. So similarly, in India, given the fact that so much of money is wasted in all this aggressive posturing and military expenditure, our proportional expenditure on education is not very trivial. It is at least better than healthcare. And the focus that the Indian government is giving towards things like Sarva Shiksha Abhijan, etc., primary level education is not insignificant. But the problem is how much of it gets wasted, how much of it is lost in corruption and things like this is a pertinent point, right? But I'll tell you, do not belittle. This is what I do not like. We have no right to rubbish the ethos of a country. So significant processes are going on. India's focus on education is not insignificant, and the IITs, medical education, whatever you call it, is simply a product of the demand-supply chain. I'm telling you, within the next 5 years, unless a dramatic change in the world comes out, your generation will look for alternative means. You will think out of the box. You will not conform to the kind of rigid pigeonholes to which our generations were expected to. Humanities will mean a lot more to you. Writing, speaking, the fine arts, the pure sciences will mean a lot more to you than it meant to our boring generation. So have faith, you'll get there.
Dr. Sarat.
Yes, just one to answer your question. Like you said, that Google often throws up multiple answers, and how do we know what to choose? So the thing is, now I feel that the teacher, it is not that the teacher is imparting information. Like over the years, the job of the teacher has been, like rightly pointed out by you, taken over by e-learning sources. So the teacher's work is to help you to, garner the information that you have acquired from different sources. So also remember that the internet, as it was earlier known as, is the web. So you're caught in that web. You have to understand how to look at information so that, you have your teachers to help you, you have your parents to help you, you have the doctors to tell you, not everything that you come up with, a headache that you come up with actually is tumor or cancer. So you remember that the teacher is that, anchor. I mean, it could be a formal person, it could be an informal or non-formal source or teacher, but is that person who gives you that direction in order to get to your goal.
I think we've come to the end of a very, very interesting discussion on education. I'll just end by telling you what I always tell my students on the first day of term when they come, and my students have passed their medicine and have a master's degree already before they come to do a postdoctorate degree. And I say that, you have been taught all this time that education is about answering questions. It is time you realized that education is actually about questioning answers. And in fact, you really become educated when you learn to question the questions themselves. The biggest problem with our education system is that we are taught to listen, but not to hear. We're taught to see, but not to observe. We're taught to touch, but not to feel. And that's what needs to be corrected, and that's what you must be aware of as students. Thank you very much. It's been a great audience.
After that wonderfully enlightening discussion, I would now like to request our principal, Mrs. Rama Subramanian, to say a few words.
I'm sure of one thing. My students would have loved the take on attendance, didn't you all? Yes! Especially by Dr. Chatterjee and Mr. Naresh Sadashivan. But I'm sure they know too that it is important to attend, to learn. We still haven't become so digitalized that we can do away with teachers and attendance. Subject choice, it's already limited, a truncated term. 2 years of +2, 24 months, which has come down to 18 months, and working under an education system, a board which means adhering to rules. I don't know if we are doing things the right way all the time. but we are definitely trying to do the right thing all the time. Thank you once again for a brilliant discussion, and of course, thank you for being a great audience, students.
Ladies and gentlemen, we take this opportunity to felicitate our esteemed panelists and moderator for the day. May I request our Assistant Secretary Sir R. Jagannathan, Mrs. Sunita Chandrasekhar, Principal Senior Secondary Hazra Road Campus, and Mrs. Meenakshi Raman, Principal Primary Section Lansdowne Terrace, to please come up on stage and felicitate Ms. Srimoy Taurufdar. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. I now request our Vice President, Sir S.M. Bhaskaran, and Mrs. Shaisri Ramesh, Principal Secondary Section, Sarat Bose Road Campus, to please come up and felicitate Mr. Naresh Sadasivan. And I also request our Principal High Secondary Section, Mrs. Rama Subramaniam. Thank you, sir. I now request our Secretary, Sir Mr. K.R. Sriram, and Mrs. Mini Nair, Principal Secondary Section, Hazra Road Campus, to please do the honors with Dr. Kunal Sarkar. And finally, our President, Sir Mr. S. Radhakrishnan, and Principal, High Secondary Department, Sarat Bose Road Campus, Mrs. Rama Subramaniam, to felicitate our moderator, Dr. Sandeep Chatterjee. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. So, audience, with this, we have come to the end of this grand event. We are thankful to all the speakers for sharing with us their valuable opinions and giving us useful suggestions. I hope you all have enjoyed and appreciated the program. Thank you all for being such a wonderful audience. Thank you.